Well, it's that time of year, actually, that the Spotify Unwrapped, and I'm sure Pornhub is not far away from releasing those stats. You spent this many hours, you looked at these kind of clips.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger.
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics
on our search to find the middle.
That's fatphobic.
I don't feel war. I just own halfway to Shiwa.
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
I act as if God exists.
Put your masks on.
How dare you! You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words.
Hello listeners, in this week's episode we celebrate our 1 year anniversary with this our 52nd episode of The Middle. To avoid being self-indulgent, we thought we would instead invite one of our listeners, Reuben, who previously appeared in episode 47 on the Israel-Palestine conflict. We got Reuben on to hold us to account for where we went wrong over the past year. Because the conversation covers a broad range of ground, this is going to be a two-part special with the second half of the conversation released next week. In part one, our guest Will, who featured back in episode 10 on our Teachers episode, gets a special mention as the greatest guest of all time. Reuben also gives us an exciting masturbation story. We revisit our episode on the Apple versus Android debate and cover work culture, which featured in a range of our episodes over the past year. More topics are covered in part 2, which will be released at the usual time next week. Thanks for listening, and we'll now bring you to today's episode. Roger, happy 52nd birthday.
Andy, how you doing?
Pretty good.
I thought you'd be bursting out of a cake for us, as we agreed when we first started this podcast. You know how much I like frosting.
There's plenty of time to come for that. Yeah, we've just completed 52 episodes of The Middle, which isn't quite 12 months because I think our first episode was released slightly less than 12 months ago, but I think we'll cross over it in the next week. And for all our sins, we're going to go through a self-criticism episode, and we've got back for the second time on the podcast, Reuben.
Welcome, Reuben. I feel like it's our annual performance review.
Maybe, that's right.
Administered by a harsh but caring Jew.
No, I won't be harsh, but wow, your first repeat guest, I don't think I deserve it. I still think Will was the all-time greatest and cannot be ever beaten. I swooned through most of that, through most of his episode. He just has the voice for radio.
His ears are going to be burning.
Yeah, he doesn't need the ego boost, Reuben, but yeah.
I should mention I do.
Did you say he has a face for radio, did you?
Voice, definitely voice. I would like him to know that now, being a parent of a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, I pass on that tip so much to let your children be bored. That will stick with me forever. So yeah, shout out to Will.
Well, we do know that childless white men may give the best parenting advice. That's something that we've come to expect on The Middle.
We've got a little bit of an idea what we're going to do today, but I don't think we've got it fully fleshed out. But as I understand, we extended an offer to you last episode that you could come on and give us all of the things that we said that were completely wrong and that we should be challenged on. So I've got my boxing gloves on and I'm ready for a exciting episode.
Well, you may recall that I promised a really good story of something that happened to me this week. I said if you'd have me back on the show, I had the most amazing story that I really wanted to share.
Let's start there.
So this is the story of something that happened to me this week. So my father is 85. He's in an aged care home, has been there for 8 years after there was an incident in the house where he just had a brain snap moment. Don't need to tell you the full story of that, but basically he's in an aged care home. And this week I got an email from the care manager, and it's brilliant. Okay, this is how it starts. This is a bit of a curly conversation for me to have with you. Recently, I felt that I had witnessed your dad having a moment of masturbation while he was watching porn on his phone.
A moment.
Of this issue, I am not concerned. However, I did need it to bring it to the attention of the doctor after other team members were able to validate the occurrence as more regular than an isolated incident. Now, firstly, I just want to acknowledge like the demeaning side of this, that it, like, let's be real for a second, that it is sad that he's in an aged care home and he can't jerk off without the staff noticing. And I do see the demeaning side of it, so I'll acknowledge that. But I do want to focus on not just okay, there's a few things going on here. He's 85. He's 85 and he's still he can still do it.
Are you proud?
Not only am I proud, I've got hope for myself. I don't I'm not an expert, but I assume in your late 60s, your 70s, you start losing interest.
So I need to understand, what's the deal with reporting it to the doctor? Is this because it was in public, or that he wasn't aware of
Good question. Yeah, why is she even telling me? And it's because of the brain snap that happened at the family home 8 years ago. She's saying he's supposed to be on medication that would reduce those. The incident that happened in the home wasn't a sexual incident.
It sure sounds like one.
But the medication is supposed to keep him calm, I guess. And then that also has a side effect that he wouldn't be getting horny, but he is. And that's what is amazing. Not only is he 85 and he can still get it up and he's still interested, but that's despite medication that's trying to hold him down. But there's also another side to this, is that in the last 4 months, he basically, as far as I'm aware, can't use his phone anymore. If I call him, he doesn't answer.
Because he's watching the porn. He's swiping you away, when you get those annoying notifications.
Do not disturb. But he's got dementia and he's losing his skills, and that's quite apparent. But for some reason, the ability to use his phone to find porn is just so primal that it's still there.
Well, they say that people with Alzheimer's can't remember things like names and faces and all that sort of stuff, but they can always remember the lyrics to a song. So maybe it's just like that. It's just this embedded, it's subconscious. It's there. It's burned in.
Maybe, how when people get dementia, they remember themselves as their teenage self, or they go back, they reverse 20 years. So maybe he's looking down and just working this teenage hardware, and he's just, he's just in the summer of 85 kind of thing. But I do have some follow-up questions too, if I may. Where did the incident take place? Because I know that you're kind of saying he should be able to do this in private. I mean, was he in some kind of private location, or was he in the mess hall?
No, I think he's in his room.
Oh, what?
They're just walking past and
with the door open. I see how he likes it. He likes the thrill of it.
Or maybe they're coming in and he doesn't stop.
I did hear a story about once someone from an aged care home, this lady, she put spent a lot of time getting ready. She put a lot of makeup on, dolled herself up, and walked down to the luncheon room for supper or whatever, and then turns out she forgot to put her pants on.
That probably sparked a letter as well.
Actually, I do have a question. Do you think that text message you got, or whatever email, was drafted by ChatGPT?
No. We could talk about AI, but every time I see something that ChatGPT or Google's Bard has produced, it's ridiculously average, which makes sense. It's supposed to be the average of everything. But no, this email was amazing.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, because ChatGPT writes most of our stuff, so that does check out. But I would say, though, something where my brain goes to when I hear this story, Reuben, is that how much follow-up inquiry did you do? Because where my mind goes to is what are the tastes of an 85-year-old man's, when it comes to porn? And wouldn't it be just the most Twilight Zone situation if he also had the same taste as you? Because, and then you're both somehow simultaneously using the same material.
I never thought about that. Yeah.
Intergenerational.
I completely agree with you. I wonder. No one's ever studied this, right? I know you can get the stats on Pornhub on what's most searched of, but they don't know which users are related.
Well, we know what Roger's into.
Well, it's that time of year, actually, that the Spotify Unwrapped, and everyone's getting a little bit of analytics force-fed down their throat, like a foie gras duck. So we're all finding out what we've done all year and whether we like it or not. And I'm sure Pornhub is not far away from releasing those stats for everyone. You spent this many hours, you looked at these kind of clips, this is what you liked this year.
So, sorry to be the killjoy to bring it back to, a more even keel. How should we do this, Reuben? You've prepared a school report for us. We're in your hands. So where should we start?
Yeah, I think it's more like Reuben's joining the conversation on some past episodes where I was just yearning to get a word in. And actually, when you had me on the show last time, I was a little bit behind and I hadn't actually listened to some of your more recent episodes. And I hadn't listened to the Android versus Apple one yet. But I remember when we were recording our episode, you guys were still going off at each other about it. But I didn't know the context. So I just stayed out of it. And then I went back and listened to that episode. And then it all made sense. And I think actually of all the controversial topics you guys have covered, that one just went from 0 to 100 so quickly. And I think that is really interesting because you're not the only ones. I think there is ingrained in society this like death match battle of Apple versus Android. And it's interesting because we don't do that about other things like, I don't know, like what brand of microwave we have or fridge.
I've got a Samsung.
I used to, it broke.
It's like, but why phones? And it's like, well, actually phones, they're basically attached to us. They're so personal. We basically can't live our lives without them. So it does make sense that they are a very big part of our identity.
Doesn't that just speak to the marketing of it, though? Like it is the marketing strategy for Apple, and then I think Apple's like the first mover, and then in response, probably the rest is to build that culture around an identity. Like it's you are like an Apple user, you are an Android user. Like it's not just which brand do you want to use. Like they had a little bit of that. Like I don't know if you remember back growing up, there was that whole thing between Holden and Ford, right? It reminds me of that.
Yeah. So is there a question somewhere embedded in that, Reuben?
Well, firstly, I wasn't really paying attention properly when you guys were just still going at each other in our episode. But when I went back to listen to it, I was like, okay, that's why they were talking about it. And I guessed immediately, before you got into it, I guessed who was Apple and who was Android. And I was quite proud that I got it right. Roger, you just come across as someone that's just like, yeah, I want the style. Like, I want to be seen as the guy with the iPhone, with the buds. What are they called? Earbuds.
Yeah.
And Andy, yeah, you just seem like the guy that's just practical. That's just like, it works. It does everything, and I don't need to pay extra. So I was quite proud of that. And I mentioned before that I'm an Android guy, and I'm passionate, and I'm very anti-Apple.
Roger, I think this is a timely opportunity to bring up some of the conversations we had after our episode, behind the scenes in WhatsApp messaging and the like. And I think, on one level, it reinforces some of my points that I raised in the episode, but then on another level, it's like a 180-degree turn. So after the episode, I've been in the market for a new laptop, right? And I started doing some research of okay, what's the deal? Because I haven't looked at this stuff for a while. And I honestly, it pains me to say it, but I did come to the conclusion that, and I haven't bought anything, but I did come to the conclusion that for this particular use case that I needed, that actually Apple had a product that was superior to anything else on the market. And so on one level, it's well, see, I'm completely all about what's going to be the best tool for the job, and I'm not going to be loyal to one model or not. But then on another level,
you couldn't bring yourself to buy it.
I'm gifting. I'm gifting Roger his claim at how good Apple is.
To be fair to the way I behaved, Andy, if you look back at those messages, and I'll get you to kind of confirm this, not once did I kind of rub your nose in it and go, nah, nah, nah? I was like, actually, it was quite opposite. I'm like, it's a good product. I'd love you to try it, kind of thing.
That was just your way of like turning the dial up even more. No, but no, you're right. I will confirm that. In fact, I think you even said, because like one of my things was like, I didn't want to like switch from Windows to Mac OS, because I think Mac OS is shit, right? And I would still say that. But the hardware side, the Apple product is better. So in my mind, it's like, okay, can I wait like a period of time until Windows, or sorry, like a Windows-based machine catches up and like either matches or becomes nearer to the performance of the Mac one? And Roger, you did say, look, if you like Windows, just wait and see and get the better one when it comes out. So yeah, you were very measured. So I'll give you credit for that.
Thank you, Andy. And look, I think that it's a good conversation, and we broke down the structure of that particular episode, Reuben. So I can understand what you mean by when we went from 0 to 100. We're just like, oh, look at the shit, like what's going on here? And we made it a little bit more personal. But I think that it's the perfect topic to do so, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. And it's a great way of just, in the same way, like, if you follow a football team, you can kind of have at it each other. Like say State of Origin in Australia, right? So whether you're a Queenslander or, you're Blues in New South Wales, you can have a go and pretend that you hate each other for the weekend. It's all good, right? Nothing is really damaged except that poor Queensland flag that I saw someone urinate on when I was only a boy, when I went to see the game in Sydney once. So I think it's an innocent topic where you can do that, and that's quite refreshing, right? Because there's not many of those left in the world that people actually care about enough to argue, but also are quite innocent in a way. I will take a little bit of a bit resentful of the comment that I come across as someone who wants the style of it all, because I remember actually I was one of the very early adopters of the original AirPods, right? And they're the earring ones. And at the time, the original ones were really long and they hung down like little earrings and like little candy canes that stuck in there. And it wasn't cool. It actually was really dorky looking. And it took people a long time to get used to it. And I thought that I was actually going against the self-consciousness to wear them, because let me tell you, no one thought they were cool when they first came out. So I have a little bit of reservations when I hear that.
Okay, no worries.
But we all know it's true.
And so we've both used all the different technology, but can I say that it also doesn't surprise me that you are an Android man either, because I think this is the horoscope of it all. Like I can tell a cheapskate when I see one.
It's in my blood. And yeah, my views on Apple are extreme, and that's fun. I can tell you exactly when like Apple Mac laptops became dead to me. I was using a friend's one, and I'm the kind of guy that maximizes all my windows. I'm going to use all the desktop space that there is. And so I'm using this Mac. I don't know what I've got open, iTunes or something. And I'm like, okay, in Windows, there are 3 buttons in the top right. It's obvious what they do, minimize, maximize, and like in between. But in Apple, and it may have changed, but there was a red dot, a yellow dot, and a green dot. And I was like, okay, one probably closes it. It's probably the same thing. And I think one of them was like maximize, but I pressed it, but it didn't completely cover the whole screen. It just maybe did it top to bottom, but not side to side. And then I had to stretch it. And then I was just like, this is silly. I'm done. You're out. I'm not using this anymore.
So that sounds like a mad cookie way of operating the system. But I will say that in that episode, I did call out that window management was something that was lacking in Mac. And there are lots of little things that they do just because they believe it's like a beautiful way or an elegant way of doing it. And they bet on themselves. And I really like that, right? Like I said in that episode, they have a vision of how not only they'll build their products, but how people use it and what problems they'll solve. And you buy into that model. my counter to some of the myth busting that goes around is that Mac OS is not flexible. It is very flexible if you want it to be, right? So I don't think that you sacrifice that much. Now, to dob myself in, Andy kind of shared his kind of view of wanting the Apple M2 chip, which is revolutionary in a lot of ways. But when I was a child growing up, back when I did play games, I loved the game Diablo. And so I thought to myself, and I think I heard Elon Musk was saying that he was like playing the latest Diablo. And I'm like, it just triggered a memory. I'm like, I'd really love to do that. I haven't touched games for ages. I'll just go buy it on my computer. And then lo and behold, I go home and I find out there is pretty much no way to get Diablo 4 on a Mac. And it just boggled the mind, right? And like all the times I was challenging Andy to say, what can't you really do on a Mac, right? And here's a big one, that actually one of the most popular games, Diablo 4, there's actually no way to get it on a Mac. And I thought, oh man, I'm gonna have to buy like a Xbox or a PS5 or something, or get a proper. I'm obviously not going to get another laptop or PC. And it just struck me as like, okay, yeah, the more you dig and the more that your needs change, there's obviously real pros and cons. But I actually couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe a game as big as Diablo couldn't be played on a Mac.
The other thing, like to the conversation, Reuben, you mentioned like the minimizing and maximizing the window. Like I've been through exactly the same journey, and there's those little things that like really drive you nuts. And when I was considering buying a new laptop, and it was genuinely, and it still would be genuinely in the running for the option to buy, I like went down to researching like the 25 like separate apps and programs I've got to pay money to install onto Mac OS to make it work more like Windows. And I'm just thinking like, oh, this is so ridiculous that you have to do this. Like, why can't you just make it work out the box? Like, and this is what I don't get about this whole, like, because I do agree Apple for most things is like out the box works brilliantly, but for some reason they just can't get it right. And I was watching these YouTube videos and this guy was complaining about how even something as simple as like when you transfer files, it doesn't tell you how fast it's transferring, like, or and it's just like these all adding up. And
because you don't need to know, Andy, you just know it's fast. I'll drop in another one that I see all the time on Mac, right? This is actually super annoying. It always has been. And people run into it all the time. So Mac users will feel me when I say this. Inevitably, when your device runs out of battery. So what happens when you have a PC? Oh, my battery's died. And it's died pretty fast because batteries are shit. I plug it in the power. I can turn my laptop on instantly because it's plugged into the power. Makes sense, right? But once you hit the dreaded out of battery on a Mac device, you will now have to go through the insulting defeat of having to wait till it gets a minimum charge. And you just have to wait there, impotent, while it shows you the battery symbol. And it still happens like that. So if the laptop or the iPad or the iPhone runs out of battery, you plug it in, it won't turn on straight away. You have to wait sometimes up to 5 minutes for it to restart.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And it's just something around the Mac architecture. It's still like that.
To be fair, the 20 hours of battery life on a Mac probably means it's going to win that.
But iPhones too. Like my iPhone still does that.
I think there was a flawed argument where, Roger, you were saying that an iPhone has all the same apps that Google has. Yeah. So you can switch, you can still use it. But of course the point is that it's a lot more expensive. You're using the Google apps, but you're paying a lot more. And I heard a statistic, and I don't know if it's still up to date, and I'm probably even going to get the numbers wrong. But it's something like that Apple has 30% of market share in the whole world. So only 30% of people that have a smartphone have an iPhone, which I think that would shock people in Australia because I'm sure iPhone is more, or at least it's maybe 55-45. But I know like when you go to Asia and you're on the public transport system, most people don't have an iPhone. Most people are using Samsung, Huawei, HTC, the Korean brands as well. But while they only have apparently 30% of the global market share, they've got 80% of the profit. And they're just making so much more profit. But having said that, like the last phone I bought was a while ago, and I got it for $1,100. And it shocks me that iPhones are more expensive. But nowadays, Samsung's flagship phone is $1,600 or even more. So it's out of date. Yeah.
there's not much difference in there. But I will point out one interesting comparison for you, Reuben, that did you know that the Jewish people make up 0.2% of the population, but they have 22% of all Nobel Peace Prizes?
No, yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
It's an overachieving kind of thing.
Yes, I see what you're trying to say.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Quite the opposite.
What about the iCloud scam, which I think is a scam, right? Is every iPhone user is paying for iCloud storage, right?
No.
Because you only get 5 gigabytes free.
That's like saying every Gmail user is paying for server space with Google.
I'm not.
and neither am I. But that's what I'm saying.
That's good, but yeah,
you have the choice.
So many people, like they take photos, like my mum, and then they run out of space, and then Apple's like, well, you've got to pay for storage, and they're just not techie enough to research other options.
Can you use Google Photos on an Apple?
Yeah, absolutely. You can use Google Photos and turn it off. You can so you have a free. Actually, the megabyte storage is pretty similar between iCloud and like Google Photos, right? Up until a certain point.
It's 15 gigabytes.
Yeah, so you get so Apple's actually quite affordable until you get into the 1 terabyte business. So it gives you kind of 200 gigs for I think about $4, which is comparable around about to the Google Photo experience. But like I said, Google Photos is a free app. You can put it, and once you put it on, Google does its thing. It's like, we want to, default this. Can I be your bestie? I don't want to be your side piece anymore. Let me store your photos, and then we'll give it to you free for this kind of thing. They even do it worse. So Google does way more promotions that iCloud doesn't do, where they say, we'll give you 200 gigs for 99 cents for the first 6 months, right? And you don't get any of that weird promotional crap with iCloud.
Yeah, that's just getting you sucked in. That's just like the drug dealer.
Yeah, because they know you're not going to do anything once you have that, right? You've got no plan. You've got no plan to remove your duplicates or your selfies or your screenshots. No one's doing that.
That's the drug dealer. Yeah, the dealer's giving you free ice hits. Like they're doing it for a reason. They're locking you in.
Yeah, and even more manipulative if you are a family man, because they know you can't bring yourself to get rid of those like child photos, right? Like the photos of the kids.
But yeah, what annoyed me the most, because I met my wife. She uses iPhone, of course. I don't know, opposites attract. And I got to know her friends, and she's got a lot of great friends, great guys. I call them my mates now as well. But at the time, all her group chats were in iMessage, and there's just no way that I could join those group chats. So I really felt so excluded.
Yeah.
And I even was researching how can you use iMessage on an Android phone, assuming that someone's found some hack that's annoying to do but is possible. But the answer was no. It's just you're not allowed in.
Reuben,
is iMessage still a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most popular. Because that's the whole thing. Like, my messages are blue, yours are green, right? So we're different, and it's actually like a big thing where it's like, I don't want to. Yeah, I like the blue message. You can sit anywhere on the bus, Reuben, but you just can't sit here. That's it. You can have any other seat.
Yeah.
Let me do a closing remark on it because it's 2 against 1 here, so I get the final say.
Well, Reuben did say it's only 30% of the market, so that's about right, isn't it?
Huawei. So all I would say is that I stand by my comment that for the most part, and whether it's through ignorance, arrogance, whatever it is, most Apple users actually don't think about Android users. And most people that I see that have a chip on their shoulder about this is coming from the Android side. Now, just because I say iPhone is great does not mean I'm saying Android is bad. But that's how it's perceived from most Android users, that I'm not diminishing your phone. You can kind of, both can be true. And so I think sometimes because there's a little bit of a perception on it, and maybe that's something that Apple users have to work on, but they don't usually talk about Android to me, or I don't hear that. So I feel like the aggression is coming from the other side of the bench.
I will just reiterate what I think I said in the episode, which is that I think Android users are reacting to Apple users, and maybe it's even like at a meta sense. That comment that you just made is the kind of smugness that Apple users give off to Android. It's like, we don't even think about you. Like,
But we're not talking about it though.
No, but that's the kind of like, and you don't even you might not even think of it or realize it in those terms, but it's that notion of like, hey, we're so happy with our products that we don't even think about those Chinese phones you're using. Like, that's what kind of Android users react to. It's almost like taking the piss out of like someone who, you know, is full of themselves almost.
But the specific example that you pulled me up on in that episode, Andy, was me saying, gee, this new iPhone takes such good video. Like, that's not an act of aggression against Android. That's
not an act of aggression, but it's an act. I mean, even and maybe it's all subconscious, right? Because I think in the end, it turned out that you said in the episode that you just use iPhone as like a generic term for a smartphone, right? But
yeah,
like
that's not a great example either in terms of what you're saying. But yeah,
but like even that just sort of, I'm just going to start calling like all computers, oh, that MacBook's good. Like, you know, kind of that's what I think Android users are reacting. And of course, when we're talking about Android users, we're not talking, I mean, we're kind of using that as a substitute for like anything other than Mac, right? But I think that's what's going on, right? So it's not that like Android users are so insecure in themselves that they have to like, you know, take it out on some other superior product. In the way that like there's that whole rivalry between Sydney. Yeah, people from Sydney love to say, oh, people from Sydney don't care about this Sydney-Melbourne rivalry thing. It's only people from Melbourne who, you know, but like that's such a like a, when a Sydney-sider says that, that's such a like, I'm going to put my foot on you so that like I don't even want to concede that we're equal in any way, right? You get what I mean?
Yeah. All right. We're all Chinese at heart. Let's not fight amongst ourselves.
All right. So, we've unpacked Apple, Android, Reuben.
Yeah, we're going to get serious now. I was having too much fun before. So this one, I really wanted to talk about it was an early episode. I think it was called Go Woke. And you talked about cancel culture, free speech. One thing I wanted to talk about is when like a certain group in society or a certain cause, you know, hasn't been addressed, hasn't gotten attention for forever, and then they start getting a voice, start getting their views across. The pendulum is going to swing too far, and it's going to sound like whinging, and it's going to be too much. And then that will get a reaction from the other side. They'll be like, okay, like we kind of see where you're coming from, but just the way you're doing it, the criticism starts to be on how people are raising their issues, their concerns, rather than what the issues are about. And I think a lot of the rage and outrage that's occurring out there in these culture wars, you know, they're not getting anywhere because they're insulted by how people are behaving rather than the points that they're making. And quite a few topics have gotten a lot of good progress. And I think racism is probably one that has progressed so much. And a good way of describing this is a little story I heard, and it's comparing how much racism or anti-racism has progressed compared to sexism or anti-sexism. And the way it goes is you could not imagine Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton having a drink and saying racist stuff about black people. Like, that would be shocking. I mean, it's already shocking that it's Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, but it's just, you can't imagine that two white people these days being racist towards black people, it's just, everyone's uncomfortable with that. But you can totally imagine Donald Trump and Obama having a drink and just talking about women and just like, oh, women. Oh,
but
it's so annoying.
Can I interject there and say how much of that is because when we're talking about different races, where like you can purely say there is no difference, like really, in a genetic or, you know, whatever sense that you want to frame it, there is no, like, it's all cultural. It's not physiological or genetic or anything like that. But when you're talking about sexism, men and women are different, you know, like they're not the same. And inevitably, and then there's all these tensions associated with like, you know, kind of men and women in relationships, and there's a lot of fertile ground there for those kinds of conversations to happen. So with your analogy, I can kind of imagine what you're saying. I can picture, I mean, what was the
I don't want to picture it, to be honest.
but
where you were
Donald
going with
Trump,
that, they have a drink with each other. Yeah. Oh.
But wasn't it like Donald Trump, you know, they grab them by the pussy line, you know, that kind of thing, right? That's a bro talk kind of thing.
Just lock a talk.
Like, you know, but like, I guess what I'm getting at is that there's a different dynamic at play.
Yeah, for sure. And Roger, you had a really good quote as well that I really liked about the world being ready for a black James Bond, but not a female James Bond. And so I think there's a...
But it wouldn't work. How is she going to, like, you know, seduce all the, like...
I think we had a strap-on joke. I'm not sure if that made it to the cut or not. I think it did, actually. But look, I think when you force these things, they don't work, which was part of that episode as well, right? With like all female renditions of things, right? You've got to make it genuine and people can smell this stuff, right? A mile away. That's why that particular thing doesn't work. But I have just a general, when you, like, literally half of the population are men, half of the population are women, right? So when you gender things like that, there's just no way that you're going to have any kind of accuracy or precision in how you're dealing with issues, because they cut across everything. You talk about intersectionality, like, I mean, what, 50% of the population, you know, that's what we're working with here? Like, come on. So I have a very hard time kind of talking about things plainly on a gendered basis because, you know, it's just too vague, and it doesn't, like, you know, are we talking about like white women, middle class, affluent white women? Like, what, you know, on that example of Hillary and Trump sitting down, I could totally see them roasting the shit out of the political class over a drink, you know, and if that political class happens to be primarily one nationality, does that hurt the conversation?
I can't remember much about the episode, actually, but like if you ask me, like, what's my current views on like wokeness, you know, I think what and I probably would have said this sort of stuff in the episode, but like it comes down to the fact that you know, what are the incentives for like holding so-called woke views? You know, like it's about establishing to your peers that you think the correct way and that you fit in, and like it's not always a genuine good faith desire to advocate for the particular view of the world you have, as opposed to that, well, you've got to have the correct views, right? And I think where this whole thing, like, and this is slightly different to like political correctness, you know, because the political correctness was the thing that's been around for decades, but you know, I think political correctness was always a little bit more like what you were saying, Reuben, earlier around society progressing. And then as society progresses, there are people left behind and like who don't update their views and like don't realize that, hey, it's okay if you're gay, and, you know, there's, you know, so it just strands people, and then those people just latch, oh, that's politically correct or whatever. But I think wokeness is a bit different because some of the things we've been seeing more recently, maybe in the last sort of 10 years or so, is this kind of almost like akin to the Cultural Revolution in China, where you have to have the right view and you have to be re-educated if you know, and it's closed this space to have good faith debate about things where you give people a generous interpretation of what they're saying, whereas people jump to the, no, I've got to call you out because I've got to show to my peers that, hey, I'm woke. And I think it's more that than necessarily that, you know, we shouldn't be trying harder as a society to, you know, be more woke per se, but it's the behaviors, like people behave abhorrently, right?
Yeah. And these woke people, I mean, they just so inherently know that they're right, because we are just talking about progress and being nicer to one another, essentially. And so when people aren't going on the same journey, I can see they've just got no patience. They've just, but I also still see it as free speech. And I think there seems to be a lot of debate, oh, you're not letting me talk. Like you're telling me that I can't have my views. But both sides have the free speech. Like, and telling someone, oh, trying to shut them down, well, that's free speech. And pushing back against it and saying no, like, I'm still entitled to my views. I might be conservative. That's also free speech. So I do think everyone is getting a say, and I don't know where it's coming from, where people think that it's not okay to say these things. And this kind of gets into cancel culture as well. That this fear of being cancelled, because everything is free speech, right? So when the companies fire an actor, well, that's their. It's just a contract. It's business, and they're making a business decision.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are a lot more ways you can get fired nowadays when it comes to that. And I'm not talking, when you see these examples, they're not exactly black and white areas, right? No one's dropped the N-bomb or something or whatever. They've said something maybe insensitive that not too long ago would have been considered funny or just maybe, laddish to say. And I think, like I said in that episode, the good part of it is the accountability. And I see that with, more personally, the racism side. Like there is some pretty offensive language that I've heard even in my career, in my time in the office, that said today would have definitely, there'd been some serious consequences. And that's the good part, right? People are actually held accountable for those people who don't have the power to push back or don't feel comfortable pushing back. That is a good safety net that I think that we should move towards. But then there's also ones that are just a little bit more, out there, right? And I think this idea of tolerance, like Australia being a tolerant society of, religious freedoms and all this kind of stuff. Like, I don't think, when you really sit down and think about how a fundamentalist Christian thinks about gay marriage or all that kind of stuff, like they should be persecuted for it. And they are, in kind of like modern workplaces.
I take your point, Reuben, about it's all free speech and all that, but at the same time, I think we should be able to call out when society's moving in the wrong direction, and that's me exercising my free speech. But like when you have a situation where you can't, there's certain topics you can't, and in fact, like increasingly, like there's lots of topics where you can't have a conversation. I mean, actually, before we started recording, Reuben, we were talking about this in a workplace setting. Like there's more and more topics that are kind of there's so many pits you can fall into where you might offend someone or be perceived a certain way that you can't have dialogue with people about. You just don't even. It used to be you don't bring up religion and you don't bring up politics. Now that list has grown to so many different things, right? We may as well throw Apple and Android onto that mix as well, right? And there's so many of those things, those topics, and dialogue is how we kind of think as a species, like collectively. Dialogue is the way we explore things and actually help ourselves and people within the community to advance their thinking on things. And if there's no space to have dialogue because, let's say Trump voters are too scared to actually raise how they really think in America, then they don't, and then they keep it to themselves and vote Trump, and they'll vote Trump again at the next election. And so we're just edging people out, and meanwhile all the people who think they know what's right, they're great, they've got their own little world where they've solved the world's problems, but they're not interacting with the real world.
And I think you might have some comments on this, Reuben, at a later segment, but Australia has just gone through the Voice to Parliament referendum, and I think that was a bit of a real life experiment of that playing out, that dynamic, that actually people felt very uncomfortable outwardly saying that they did not support it, and it was very much shut down from the yes side that there was something morally wrong with them for that, and it caused a lot of tensions within families, within friendship groups. Yet at the end of the day, most people voted no, right? So, and I think if they had a more genuine dialogue and kind of worked that through, it would have been much better for everyone, right? Instead of just kind of a pressure to say, look, this is the progressive way to think, this is the right way to think, and really, if you're not with us, you're against us.
Yeah, I see. I agree with that, but I do think about where are the appropriate places to have this dialogue. And I think
Slack forums, obviously.
and I think, I think it's a good thing that we should be careful about what we say at work, because work is primarily doing the work. It should be a place where people can go and...
So, Reuben, are you saying that maybe organisations shouldn't put their hat in the ring for certain socio-political issues, like The Voice, like
for me,
gay marriage?
That's free speech again. But
you just said it's about the work.
Well, that's the boardroom getting together and deciding what they're going to do. And yeah, probably there are people in that room that are very genuine and they think, I can make a difference here. But also there are people in the room thinking about the brand and they're doing something that they think is going to help the company. But in the end, it's their decision on what they're going to do. But I think, in social media where people are having these debates, like no one's changing their mind. Everyone's offending everyone else and everyone's being defensive. So to me, it's absolutely pointless. And I used to engage in it years ago a bit on Twitter, but quickly lost interest because there's no progress to be made. Everyone's just trying to win an argument and try and end up feeling, oh yeah, I smoked that guy.
There is hope though. And I will say that reflecting on coming up to our year anniversary of the middle, I actually know some of our listeners who have changed their minds on topics after listening to these shows and talking to the people that they care about. And it's a very strange feeling. And I don't know if you can relate to this, Reuben, but when you listen to someone that you trust and they give you a piece of new information and you can almost feel yourself in real time changing your opinion, or even maybe not changing your opinion, but you're being influenced. You can be like, oh yeah, I'll start nodding your head and you're like, oh man, there's this whole angle to this that I didn't see and maybe I've been thinking about this differently. And I see it all the time, sometimes talking to my mum who kind of stays out of most of these issues or handles them at arm's length. And then when I talk to her, I realize how influential I can be on her because she trusts me and I'm giving her information. She's like, oh, maybe I should think differently about this. And I can see the influence happening. So I do think there are spaces for it. Social media, definitely, maybe not. But I would say that a lot of people are reading social media through the bushes and not participating in posting. And those people probably are fair game for being influenced by a lot of things.
I think the other thing too is social media, but there's also a difference between debate, as in debate almost for the sport of it, and just genuinely having a conversation about something, right? And often these sorts of taboo things aren't necessarily framed in the context of a debate. It's just that even just a general conversation or even someone tacitly just putting their view forward, but not necessarily in a I've got to win this, kind of manner, gets pulled up. And I think you also said, Reuben, earlier about having, you mentioned in the context, not in the workplace, or there's certain places where it should or shouldn't happen. There's this concept of a safe space, right? And I would take your point around the workplace because that's probably one of those environments where just generally people shouldn't be get on with your job, right, sort of thing. But what about a university? Universities, is it the safe space concept was basically invented on a university campus, right? And it's there should not be safe spaces in a university. A university is a place to go to stretch your ideas and challenge your views. You could be 110% confident that you're right about something, but your job as an inquiring university student should be to find out the best reasons why you're wrong, no matter how virtuous your view is, right? And I think that's gone, and I don't think there should be safe spaces in those sorts of places. And unfortunately, it's crept into that. Sorry, the other part to all of this is I think this whole fear of the end of Western civilization because of wokeness is well overblown. I don't think I want to be tempered as well to say I don't think young people these days, they don't. I don't want to get into that voice, but I do think generally the momentum has been in the wrong direction.
I was confused of what a safe space was. I thought a safe space was where it's safe to speak your mind. not it's a safe space because no one's going to say anything controversial. And apparently both exist. And if someone says this is a safe space, you're supposed to clarify which kind.
Which one is it?
Point of privilege.
Well, you can imagine like a university class where they're discussing topics relating to the history of racism or something, right? And you can just imagine like in unpacking like, oh, okay, let's look at the causes of racism in the 18th century in the United States, right? Or something like that. And you could just imagine in a classroom with 50% of the students African American and 50% not African American, how that dynamic would be. I don't know, this sort of weird sort of environment where no one's really, it's just everyone's too afraid to just like step on an eggshell, right?
Yeah. And then I think back to how this world is so different to 100 years ago. And you guys spoke about it as well, that if you wanted to exercise your free speech, you have to get up in the morning and go to a protest and hope that the newspaper covers it, or write a letter to the newspaper and hope it gets in there.
Oh, you've been listening to Meghan Markle's podcast.
Well, I do have a friend who wrote into Media Watch when she was like, I don't know, like 6 years old or something, or 8 years old. And they actually brought her into the studio to record it because do you remember when Greg Norman had his major, like he was winning the US Open or whatever it is, that's tennis, sorry, that's how much I know about golf, the big American golf tournament, and he was up by like 17 strokes or something, and then he ended up flopping on the day, and the news, put him first, but she was annoyed as like an 8-year-old because on the same day an Australian woman won a golf championship and she didn't she was mentioned later on. So like, that's so sexist.
But come on, let's be honest. They got it right.
It was a momentous occasion.
Yeah. It's like that. I mean, a more recent example of that is in women's sport is probably the Ash Barty Rafa Nadal thing, where they pulled Rafa aside and said, you're not number one in the world anymore, yet you're getting all the matches on centre court, and Ash Barty is number one in the world and she's not. Like, how is this fair? And, it's obvious to most people why it is fair and why they're doing it, right? And why laid at the foot of the athlete that's not even planning the courts, right? So I think, I think this is part of the issue sometimes, that if you get too caught up in this ideology and this idea of like wokeness and free speech and where are the boundaries, where are the walls, like you just lose the common sense in it, right? And you cannot bake in rules for all this stuff. There's lines in society, there's a zeitgeist, there's things that we know and that we know are right and wrong, and then there's a grey area. And the problem is when you're operating in that grey area, you need to give people a little bit of, good faith and trust. And so I would say that the right time to have some of these conversations in the grey area is when you do have trust with someone or an organization or an institution. And that's what people are missing. They're just going into areas that are totally anonymous and expecting to have a productive conversation about grey area topics with some pretty hostile people and then wonder why the whole thing goes up in flames, right? I've got a good example of this. When I was growing up, I had a real interest in Christianity, and my parents were part of a church. And I remember going to this youth group that was really popular at our school at the time, and they had like a Bible study group. And I went in there, and I was kind of like laying probably foundations to become a little bit more interested in atheism and different things later on. But I would really come at it to this the Bible study leader, this youth pastor, if you will, about questions around where I saw all the holes in the doctrine. And because I was coming from it with curiosity and trust, and I wasn't trying to just hang him out and all this kind of stuff, he really engaged with it with me. And it was a really intellectually fulfilling kind of period of my life. But again, if you don't have that trust, or you come in with just like hostile, like, this is why it's wrong, and you already have that opinion, right? Then you're going to get a very different result. Because you can think of how this breaks down all the time with like free speech and stuff. Like, a classic one is the whole Nazi thing, right? So there are Holocaust deniers, there are Nazi sympathizers and all this kind of stuff. Yes, free speech is a thing, but should that, not all ideas are also equal, and should that be injected or given as much time or as much prominence as some of the other ideas at a university, for example? The answer is no, right? So get your heads around that. Common fucking sense. But you lose it because it's kind of like, oh, I'm trying to deal with the principles here and the concepts. But really, like, we just need to kind of go back to some common sense principles around trust and grey area issues.
I think, Roger, with that example, the reason the answer is no is because it's organically no. It's not no because there's some, like, regulation in the university saying thou shalt not foster any thoughts that Nazism was good for humanity, right? Like, so, and I think that's where we should
some
be.
of those laws in protest, though, in some countries.
Well, but like in terms of where we should be as a society, it should be like we should embrace our own culture to stamp out bad ideas, rather than like creating kind of these rules about what you can and can't discuss. So,
agree.
And I think that's what is emerging now with the, you know, a lot of these topics where it's like, no, you can't actually have that view. Imagine you have a good faith position against acknowledgement of country ceremonies, right? Imagine you have, not out of a position of like malice or disrespect, but more so a philosophical view that it's potentially a vacuous exercise, and you might have a position that you don't want to say it in a workplace, but that's not accepted. Like that's not a view in a modern workplace you'll find that you'll encounter some issues if you try and express that. If someone says, oh, would you be able to give an acknowledgement to country during this meeting? And you said, oh no, sorry, I don't believe in it.
Yeah,
like,
and you don't get down like that.
So anyway, I think these are some of the There's
like
no tolerance of.
I agree, but like this is where it breaks down, right? So Holocaust deniers, Nazi sympathizers, okay, organically no. But if I want to have an academic discussion about certain structural elements that caused the emergence of the behaviors of and the rise of Adolf Hitler, then that's also kind of like, oh, I'm not sure, because you just told me Nazi sympathizers are out, but now it sounds like you're talking about structural reasons that everyone's involved in that brought about his behavior and kind of takes some responsibility away from the Nazis. That sounds like a bit of sympathy. But it's like, actually, no, now we're into a grey area. And if the right environment and trust is built up around that, then yeah, that's a form of inquiry that maybe is acceptable, right? Right.
Yeah. I think what I'm saying is that like highly opinionated strangers that are set in their views, there's just no point them arguing. And 100 years ago, I get my gut feel is that it was only the minority that were opinionated and educated and weighing in on this. Most people, like if they were even reading the newspaper. Fast forward to now, suddenly the internet and Facebook and whatnot have given a new thing that we've never had before, where anyone can just broadcast anything. And it's had crazy consequences, like the story you guys told of the woman that got on the plane going to Africa and wrote the racist tweet. Like, that's not the right app. Send that in a WhatsApp group message to your friends who know you're not racist and you're just having a joke. But she didn't think that millions of people will be reading that, and that's just
hot take.
So strange.
Hot take, Reuben. Do you think that was okay?
That she should have written it on that app, or what she wrote?
Just reading it as she probably meant it for comedic effect. Would you just have a laugh and move on? Or do you think that if you were in charge of orchestrating the whole situation, what would you have done?
Well, if I knew her and I knew, like, if I knew she was a racist person, then yeah, I'd judge it. But she's probably not. She was just making a racist joke. That is fine when your audience is constricted to just the people who know you and no one's going to get offended. But why? Like, that's the thing. Like, it's like you're giving someone this weapon that has immense power, and most of the time, no one reads your tweets. But you don't know where it's going to go, and like people aren't sort of educated enough on the dangers of social media. And like, what one reason I stopped using Facebook is I didn't like when we're having a face-to-face conversation, there is complete freedom on how we communicate. But then Zuckerberg comes along and says, these are the things you're going to be able to do. You can write on someone's wall. You can send them a private message. You can poke them. Remember when you used to be able to poke people on Facebook? That's not a thing anymore, right? But it's like
I think the sexual assaults went up after that.
Not a good look, the optics.
But it's like, why am I allowing someone or a group of people to define the structure of how people communicate? And I think that's a really weird thing to accept, that we're going to communicate under those rules. So I just reject it.
Make sure you tune in next week where we discuss the famous World Cup kiss, some further thoughts on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and our position on the indigenous voice to Parliament. We also asked Reuben to rate our performance over the past year, including a score out of 10 for how close to being in the middle we actually are, and who between Roger and I is most often correct. Speak to you next week.